Hello everybody, welcome to the Land Contracts block, Lecture 9, and tonight's festivities. We're going to look at a wide area of laws tonight, and we're also going to look at the concept of risk. Before we do that, the last assignment is up on Learn, and you'll see that the basics of it's a short assessment with short answers. And we'll be doing a couple of things tonight which will be relevant to it. And the only thing I will say to you about the assignment at this stage is read the questions carefully and don't miss questions, basically. But I'll come back to that shortly. Now, with the concept of tonight's, what we're looking at, what I'd like you to do, just initially, is I want us to have a look at and go over some of the areas of law that we have encountered on this course, but also on your other areas of study in this particular course. So, what I'd like you to do, just putting in context, let's tell me about the different areas of law. We'll start off with the sources of law. What are they? What are they? Do you remember?
We've got two sorts. One is common law, it's from the court.
Yep. Okay.
The other is from the parliament.
Okay.
Parliament made of states.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned common law, didn't you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Common, and you said that was from the courts.
Yes.
Fantastic. And you also said something else.
Parliament.
Parliament,
Yeah.
statute law. Okay, so we're looking at the sources of law. So you've mentioned statute law and common law. Now, just for our own memory's sake, statute law is also known as what? It's spread the love. Somebody else, I want you to spread the love. Also known as what? Legislation. Thank you. Legislation. Statute law, legislation is also known as something else. Acts. Is that it?
Of Parliament.
Of Parliament. Fantastic. Acts. Is it? This is a joint effort.
Participation. Yes.
Yeah.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. Thank you. Acts of Parliament. Okay. Now, while we're there, just so we're clear, it's also known as enacted law. Now, in addition to statute law, Acts of Parliament, which is still the same thing, but we need to also remember, when we went on Ostley, remember, we looked at the Acts of Parliament, we also looked at something else, didn't we? Regulations. And that's called what? Can you remember? Regulations are an example of
How to interpret.
Yeah, absolutely. In legally, what's it's an example of what? What's that called? Anybody? Gold star. No Googling, thank you.
Oh, just drawing notes.
I'm joking. I'm joking, Michael.
Implementation. Okay.
What's it?
The implementation.
Yeah, it's called something else. Martha, no pressure.
I can't think. Is it terrible? So just do the question again, please.
That's all right.
Definition.
It's also called something legislation.
Not secondary.
Yeah, well, it's called delegated or subordinate legislation.
No, haven't heard of that one.
E.g., which you all got, which is the most important thing, e.g. regulations.
Right.
Okay? Now, so we've got the first source of law sorted. Now, you said common law, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Judge law.
Judge-made law. Thank you. Judge-made law. Also known as what?
Case law.
Case law.
Case law. Good. Good. Case law. And it's also known as unenacted law. So you notice how these different names and words, they can confuse us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We can get actually confused by this different terminology. If we were going to say strictly speaking, we could say, well, legislation is a general, which can include lots of these things. But really, we just can lump these for our purposes, we can treat them the same. Otherwise, it gets confusing. All right? So it's very similar. Now, a third source of law, which you've also come across in the course. No, you hold that thought, because I'm coming back to you. Third source of law. Some people say it's not a third source of law. Some people say it's common law. It's very close to common law.
Is it natural law?
Not quite.
State government makes law and...
So we've got Parliament, we've got common law. We're going to call common law 2A, if you like. Anybody? So, sources of law.
Precedents.
Hold that thought. I'm coming back to you in a moment, Gish. Historically, in England, 400 or 500 years ago, okay, there were common law courts, and then there were other types of courts until these were fused.
Equity courts.
Equity courts, thank you. So the third one, 2B, is equity. Remember what equity was about?
About money. Fairness.
Fairness, thank you.
Yeah.
Fairness, that's the simplest way we can approach it. Fairness, okay. So we've got these three sources of law, okay, we've got to come back to. And when we look at Parliament, okay, we've actually got two levels for this, haven't we?
Yep. It's got your upper house, lower house.
Federal, state.
Federal and
Yeah,
state.
federal and state, that's it.
So we've got two levels, federal and state. Okay.
So your Commonwealth Act and your state.
That's right. Yep, and we're going to put, we'll put Commonwealth there so that we've got that clear. Federal, same as Commonwealth. So we've got two levels of that. Now, with common law, which is court judgments, and those are developed through precedent. Thank you. Okay. Good, you're doing well. And of course, we've got courts from both federal and state.
And the hierarchies of the courts.
And the hierarchies of the courts, absolutely. Now, areas of law that you've covered in this course, not just in this subject, I'm talking about other subjects that you've also already done, okay? We want to have a little bit of a recap of those different areas. Areas of law. Torts. Okay, so we've got torts.
Contract. Criminal
Contract.
law.
Contract law, fantastic. And particularly when we start thinking about, going to start applying these to you in conveyancing, okay, which we're going to do shortly. But so contract law you've raised. You've also mentioned torts.
Business law of torts.
And what other areas of law have you come across?
Property law.
Property law. Property law you said, didn't you? Yeah. What other areas of law?
Corporations, business.
I think absolutely, corporations law. Yeah. We talked about, come back to torts. Now torts, what is torts again? What does tort mean?
Negligence.
Well, that's an example.
Wrong.
It's a
Wrong.
It's a wrong, isn't it? It's a civil wrong.
That's the word I was trying to think of before. Civil. No.
And you gave me an example of negligence. E.g. negligence. So that's an area that can affect conveyances, can't it?
Yes.
And what was this negligence again? My memory's terrible. What was all that about?
That is
Without properly reviewing
It's a breach of a duty of care.
A breach of a duty of care. Fantastic. I tell you, you guys have definitely been doing well today. A breach of a duty of care. Excellent. Excellent. Now, offshoots of negligence that could affect you as conveyancers
Slander.
might be. Well, I'll take defamation. Yeah, well, I'll take that. Possibly. But other areas of negligence, offshoots of negligence, which we also need to remember are. What else? Negligence in what form? It's quite often the separate areas of negligence which we can.
Purposely neglecting and without knowing.
When you did torts, some areas that might have come across. What about if I give you advice? What's that called? If it's wrong.
Well,
Could
if
be.
you're putting yourself across as knowing something and somebody enacts on it and it does it in harm,
Yeah.
then you're negligent.
Yeah, but what do we call that in law? Negligent what?
Misconduct.
Huh?
Negligent misconduct or advice?
No? It's called negligent
Representation, no.
I can't even read that.
misstatement.
Statement.
And what about other areas of law that could affect you as a conveyancer? What about if you have an office and I come into your office? You've got to make sure what?
You're not hurt or fall over or trip over or
Thank you.
anything like that.
Thank you. I don't fall over, I don't slip over, and we call that occupiers what?
Liability.
Liability. Okay, good. I think that those are the main ones we need to remember. Because we also have to understand these concepts. Some of these areas are what are called causes of action. Okay?
Can it be and inaction?
No, causes of action. They're called causes of action. And they're ways, they're grounds on which you could be sued. Okay? Causes of action. So, torts. Now, contract law you mentioned. What the idea of contract law is what? What's the basics of contract law? You can tell me.
Business.
Every day we often enter into contracts, don't we? And the basic principle is that you and I agree. And as part of that agreement on something, we agree on something, and that contract will be made up of terms. So when we agree, we're saying there's offer and acceptance, and the contract will be made up of terms. You and I will have what are called rights and obligations under the contract if we enter into a contract. Now, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do under the contract, or you don't do what you're supposed to do under the contract, we have a breach of contract. And so, if we have if you breached your contract with me, that will entitle me to do a remedy, to sue you for breach of contract and claim usually remedies, and most remedies will usually be
Cash.
damages. Yes, there's other remedies, but that's the most common. Okay, good. Now, what other areas of law? We've talked about property law, and we'll come out on corporations. We'll come on to that in a moment. Any other areas of law that?
Tax law.
Well, tax law. Yeah, we don't have a specific subject, but that's going to be important. Absolutely.
Especially with the GST.
GST. Yeah. What other areas of law? This is quite important for us to be aware of. You probably would have covered it in make decisions. I would hope.
Legal contract.
No?
Agency law.
Not too much agency law, but I'll take agency law. Let's put that up there.
Fraud and
No.
terrorism.
No.
No.
Oh, okay, we'll come back to that in a moment, actually. You just hold on to that. We're going to talk about legislation in a moment. Another area of law that's quite important, particularly with you guys, because you're going to be dealing with members of the public.
Consumer
Consumer law.
Yeah. Yeah, customer protection.
Consumer law, yeah, absolutely. And importantly under consumer law, and I'm hoping you're going to be able to, I'm going to go through this again with you, just a brief refresher tonight. And I'm just hoping there's going to be some real bright lanterns turning on. When we talk about consumer law, the main area which we want to focus on with consumer law is what?
Consumer protection.
Consumer protection, yep. Can you anybody give me a section or anything that jumps out?
Is that corporations?
What?
Corporations?
But no?
Refund?
From the Australian
Essex, isn't it? The return policy thing.
Australian consumer law. Some key sections you'd have looked at when you did Australian consumer law.
18? Is that
Fantastic. Section 18. Gold star for you. What's section 18 about? Can you remember? Important. We're going to talk about. I'll go through it very briefly with you tonight, but I just want you to get it back in your head. Section 18. Oh, my memory's terrible. What? Section 18.
Hint.
Sounds like-
M and D. M and D. That's a hint.
Manufacturing defects.
No, something misconduct.
Sounds like. First letter is M. Second word is D. Something conduct.
Discipline.
Is it mandatory?
Something and something conduct.
can't remember.
Okay. Misleading and deceptive
Oh,
conduct.
Oh, so this is the old Trade Practices Act.
It's
Bill.
the old-
It's now called. Yeah,
Yes.
that's why I'm confused. Yeah.
It's the, previously under the old trade practice, it was section
And the fair-
52.
Section, and then he used to have was it the Fair Trading Act for the state, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's
Trade
the
practices
Australian.
for the Commonwealth.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's why this.
Yeah, no, it's the updated
Okay,
version.
so this is now what we used to call the Trade Practices
That's
Act.
right. And it's now contained in what's called the Australian Consumer Law.
Okay, Australian Consumer Law.
And
Okay.
it was previously section 52,
Yeah, I remember doing that
and
one.
it's
Yeah.
now section 18.
Okay.
So a lot of the cases there's a lot of case law under section 52, but it's the
Which is
same as
still
section 18.
relevant.
It's still relevant.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're doing well. Okay. Now, it's not actually a tort, but you could say it's kind of a little bit in that area.
Misleading, deceptive conduct.
Okay. There's something else we also need to be aware of, which is usually based on the relationship.
Vicarious.
Thank you, Giddish. What's that called?
Vicarious liability.
Vicarious liability. Good. And can you remember what that is? The basic idea of that is?
Well, if you work for someone, the actual places, or you do something wrong, then they're liable
Yes,
as well.
that's right. Where one party is
Yeah,
responsible
yeah.
for the actions of the other.
Like a hospital, for example. If in a hospital something happens, and then the hospitals also get sued.
Good. Yeah. So we're essentially where we act in the ordinary course of our employment. It's based on the relationship. So vicarious liability we're going to have a chat about tonight a little bit later. So we've got some good areas of law here, which you've recognised. I also want you to now tell me about different acts of Parliament that you've come across, which are going to be relevant to you as a conveyancer. So I want to spread the love. Yeah? Who can give me an act of Parliament that's going to be as relevant to you as a conveyancer? Can't be too hard, surely. First dibs. Who's going to put the hand up first?
Convincing.
Thank you, Wissam. Conveyancing Act. Now.
Hi, Julie.
Hi. Hi, thanks.
Now. Conveyancing Act. So, Wisdom, you've got best act to come up with. Is that state or federal?
State.
State? You sure?
Yes.
You confident?
Yeah.
Good. What other acts? Somebody else that you can recall that's relevant to us in conveyancing?
Land sales and business.
Goodish?
Land sales and business.
Land, sale,
Land.
Land and business and
Land and business, sale and conveyance.
fantastic. It's a federal act, isn't it?
no state.
It's state?
State.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Very good. Land and Business, Sale and Conveyancing Act. Good. What other acts?
The Land Agents Act.
Land Agents Act, I'll take that.
Real property.
That's federal, isn't it?
No, state.
Is she right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Land Agents Act, I'll take that. Now, let's spread the love to somebody else, some of the quiet ones. Can you give me another act that you've come across in the conveyancing course that's relevant to you guys?
Disputer?
Yeah, Despina.
Dobberin. Dobberin. No, I'm not sitting here.
Despina? No pressure?
No pressure, though. No pressure. Get a lolly if you get the question right. I should have brought some chocolate frogs, actually. Shall we?
Give me another act that you've come across on this course that's going to be relevant to you.
Law of Property Act.
Law and Property Act, thank you. Now, is that a state or is it federal?
State.
State? Law and Property Act, good. Someone else? Oh, you're itching to tell me one, aren't you? I can see on your face.
Is it tax act or something?
The Tax Act?
No, there's no tax act.
And that's federal if it was.
Yeah.
Oh, federal. Taxation, federal. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, well, that's you like tax, clearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another act that you've come across on the conveyancing course that's relevant to you guys.
And we've got the Real Property Act.
What? Oh, Despina.
Despina, you went
Yes.
bang.
Real Property Act, Despina says. Now, is that federal or state? Don't look at her.
It's all French.
Oh, it's both.
Real Property Act, state or federal?
State already, but
State.
State. So we've got the Real Property Act. Now, well, we've mainly state acts so far that have been relevant. What about some federal ones? Martha,
Yes.
what federal acts have you come across that are important from the...
Well, I've only just started this course, but don't look at me. Yeah, oh well.
Yeah, come on. Whilst you're thinking.
Would bankruptcy and
Bankruptcy Act, yeah. I don't think you've done much
We did, yeah.
on here, but I'll put it on here.
Yeah.
The Bankruptcy Act. And that's a federal act.
Criminal Consolidation Act.
that's South Australian.
Criminal Consolidation.
My hearing's still British.
Criminal Consolidation.
Well, criminal consolidation. But I'm not going to put that on the book, so I'm not expecting any of you to be breaching that particular act. All right? There's no criminals in this room.
Well, the Checks Act, or something to do with checks.
Okay, yeah. What's that called?
Checks Act.
Well, the Checks Act, yeah, I guess so. But I thought you were leading to something else, which is probably more relevant.
Fraud? Something to do with fraud?
No, I'll put the Checks Act.
That's federal.
Yeah. What about reporting? Anybody remember did anything on that?
FIR. Foreign Investment Review Board.
Okay, foreign investments, takeovers, acquisitions. Yeah, okay. Foreign investment, takeovers and acquisitions. Yeah.
How about the Migration Act?
No, we're not. That's to conveyancing. So, what about reporting? Anybody remember acts you come across to do with reporting?
Any money that goes in or out?
Money laundering.
10,000.
Yeah.
To do with money laundering, 10,000. And it's called the what? there's two hand in hand that work now. There's the Financial Transactions Reports Act,
Yeah.
which we're all talking about, and the Anti-Money Laundering Act.
Yes.
Financial Transactions Reports Act and Anti-Money Laundering. Okay.
Oh man.
Now, we're doing quite well, but we've missed an easy one. As the answer's virtually on the board.
Yeah, you said it though. Corporations Act.
A Corporations Act, did you say that?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear you. Was it state or federal?
Federal.
That's federal.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay, Corporations Act. Okay, and the Australian consumer law we talked about here is actually the Competition and Consumer Act. And Consumer Act. And in Schedule 2, you'll find the Australian consumer law in there. Okay? And now, so we've got a couple more that I guess you could also mention here. One that's relevant to you guys.
What's the one under Checks Act say?
It's the competition of the financial.
Acronyms suck.
It's the.
Something investment.
Oh yes, no. It's the Financial Transactions
Corporations Act.
Reports Act.
Yeah, I don't think so.
What was this one?
And anti-money.
I think I've written it twice.
Yeah, I'm confused now.
Yeah.
And what's the other one? Anti-what?
Anti-money laundering. Yes.
Corporate.
You had me there for a moment. I thought, what's that? I couldn't even read it myself. What it was? It's a bit of a worry, isn't it? Age 92. Yeah. No.
You must have taken Doctor's Writing 101.
Well, thank you for that. Yes. Now, one of the other acts we can just finish off with here. I think you've. Oh no, hold on. There's.
Well, we can put a name to the taxation one, the Stamp Duties Act.
Thank you. Stamp Duties Act. Is that state or federal?
That's
State.
Dates aren't
state
down.
one, because it's through revenue state, isn't it?
Stamp Duties Act. Good.
Oh, Stamp Duty, yeah.
Okay.
Taxation's not.
Now,
Register.
one other thing. We talked about torts here and here, but there's also legislation on this relevant to torts, which is called what? Remember when you did torts? The name of the act, which also legislates on torts.
Well, it used to be the Wrongs Act, it's not that anymore.
You're right, it used to be the wrong thing. It's changed the name, yes. Yeah.
Victoria still called wrong. But
I
we hear about the.
can't think now, I've got that mental blank.
Julie, no pressure?
No, little bite too. Give us all a hint.
Civil,
Civil
Liability.
civil liability. Is that state or federal?
Yes, it says state.
You sure?
Yes, because Victoria called wrong act. Yeah.
Civil Liability Act, yeah.
Yeah, it used to be the one.
Civil Liability Act. Okay, good. All right, now, we've got all of these different laws which are affecting us in our dealings. Okay? So we've got to be aware that in what we do, that we comply with any necessary requirements in either the common law or legislation. Okay, so we've got quite a bit to work with there. Okay. Now, okay, so let's just have a look at a few of these in a little bit more detail, just as a quick refresher.
No, sure.
Let's go over with you. She was quick to volunteer you, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah.
Throw under the bus.
That's what Martha's all about. Phil, what's that? Under S18 it's misleading and what's that?
Deceptive conduct.
Deceptive conduct.
Yes.
Is that supposed to say precedent under enacted law where it says present?
It is meant to say precedent. Yes. Oh, yes, it is. Yes. Thank you for that. I better do capitals in future. Thank you, Martha. A bit of sympathy was very, very much appreciated. Now, joking aside, okay, I just want to go over a couple of things with you. So, we've got some example legal areas, okay, which I'm just trying to see now if you pick these, okay. And the first one we've got is breach of contract. Did you have that? Fantastic. Next one we've got is negligence in the form of negligent misstatement. And you did get occupier's liability, which is great. Misrepresentation. What was that again? Misrepresentation. We didn't put that one on the board, did we?
I think that was authorization.
That's where you say something is when it's not, and you haven't really checked that it isn't, or it is.
Not quite, Jane, but...
We didn't actually say that word, but we didn't
talk
round about that way.
we didn't talk about misrepresentation, and we can actually have misrepresentation. It's probably a little bit between contract law and torts. We could put it there, in between them.
Misrepresentation is...
There is a Misrepresentations Act, isn't there?
There is, yeah. So misrepresentation, in very simple terms, is essentially where a false statement of fact is given, which induces a person to enter into a contract.
And knowingly you
Yeah, and there's three different types. There's innocent, negligent, and fraudulent. But it's kind of in between contract law. If you can't sue them for breach of contract, you might be able to use misrepresentation and claim a misrepresentation has occurred, either within the contract or separate to the contract. The Australian Consumer Law, Section 18. Okay. And so just to remember, as a quick reminder on this, and the reason I want to go over this one with you is because it's quite an important section, really. All right. Section 18, a person must not in trade or commerce engage in conduct that is misleading or deceptive or is likely to mislead or deceive. So now, trade or commerce is very wide, okay. Probably the best way I can explain which is not in trade or commerce as an example for you, okay. If I sell my house myself and I put it on the market and I sell it to somebody here, that's not in trade or commerce. I'm selling my own property. But if I actually engage you with them as my agent to sell my property, now that transaction would be in trade or commerce. Okay, if I engage you as an agent. Essentially, mislead or deceive, it's to lead into error. And as I've put here, often areas where it applies things like advertising, which I think most of us follow, and I'll give you an example in a moment. Passing off is where businesses do things which may mean that you believe you're entering into contracts or whatever the case with a certain company, when in fact you're not actually engaging with that company. I'm trying to pass myself off as them, whether I'm trying to use a similar name or very similar colours or on my logos and things like that, and you think you're engaging with somebody else when really I'm trying to use a competitor's reputation to try and get you involved.
Yeah, that really sucks.
Okay. And it can also apply to things like statements as to the future, and even in some respects to opinions. Whereas, for example, with misrepresentation, it normally doesn't apply to those. And I think when we did contract law, I gave you an example. Remember, when we did contract law, I gave you an example of a block of land I was selling at Victor Harbour. Anybody remember that? I gave you how you could use it for misrepresentation. No? If I've got time, I might go over that a little bit later, just as a refresh. I didn't want to send you to sleep. Okay, the other thing about Section 18 is that just on advertising, examples of how this can apply. A couple of cases just to give you as a bit of a refresher. There's the old Union Carbide case, which most of you probably will never forget. Remember the bunny rabbits? Mm-hmm. Remember the bunny rabbits doing the drums?
Yeah.
And they had the advertisement. They show the bunny rabbits. And then one batch of bunny rabbits were still banging the drums, and the other batch weren't. And Union Carbide brought an action against the alkaline. I think it was Duracell or somebody like that from memory. It was quite a few cases at the time, and they basically claimed that the competitor their advertisements were misleading and deceptive, and the court in that particular case did find that they were misleading and deceptive because while it was accurate, the purpose of the ad was to show that the bunny rabbits kept continuously being used. But what the court found was that they were misleading and deceptive because that was a continuous drain test, which meant they were turned on and they just kept running. But most people wouldn't use their batteries that way. They'd often use them intermittently, and when they were being used intermittently, you didn't see a great difference. And so the court found that it was misleading and deceptive. Because if you're going to actually leave them on full stop, most people would actually plug the device into a mains power, if that makes sense. So in that old Union Carbide case, that showed how the type of testing, it could be seen as quite misleading and deceptive. Also under Section 18, silence can also amount to misrepresentation, particularly if it creates a wrong impression. And a good example of that is the Hengio Investments case. Remember that one, which you might have done in consumer law? No, that's Hengio Investments. Yeah, this one is a very good one. What happened was a business was being sold. It was a restaurant, and the restaurant was licensed, I think, to have 84. It was licensed for 84 people. When the purchasers went to the premises, they saw all the seating, and there were actually seating and tables and stools at the bar and so on, which were actually 124 chairs there. And so they paid about $500,000 for this restaurant, and then they discovered that their solicitor didn't bother to check the details of the license, unfortunately, and they discovered that it was only licensed for 84. So the purchase of the restaurant thought, well, hold on a minute, I'm buying this believing I can have up to 124 patrons in my restaurant here, but in fact legally I can only have 84. So what do you think his beef was? The difference in that's right. So I can't get as many people. I'm not going to make as much money in this business, etc., etc. And it went to court, and the court essentially found the restaurant owners had been misleading and deceptive. They'd created a false impression, and which they should have. Yes, that's right, and they should have corrected it essentially, but they didn't. And so that was deemed to be misleading and deceptive conduct. And you'll find a number of cases on there. But the key thing about Section 18 is you don't have to intend to mislead. You could have the best will in the world, but you don't basically, it doesn't matter. They're going to look at whether it has misled or is likely to mislead and deceive in the circumstances. The other one, we'll also have a quick look at, is Section 30 of the Australian Consumer Law. One other thing to remember with Section 18 is that it's civil remedies, essentially, with Section 18. Section 30, which was previously Section 53A, and we've got false or misleading representations about the sale, etc., of land. And I'm not going to read out the whole section to you. I'm just going to read out a few of the key parts. A person must not in trade or commerce in connection with the sale or grant or the possible sale or grant of an interest in land or in connection with the promotion by any means of the sale or grant of an interest in land. We've got A, false or misleading representation about sponsorship approval. We've got B, make a false or misleading representation concerning the nature of the interest in land. Make a false or misleading representation concerning the price payable for the land. D, make a false or misleading representation concerning the location of the land, concerning the characteristics of the land. Misleading representation concerning the use to which the land is capable of being put. And also we've got the existence or availability of facilities. So straight away we can see here real estate agents could come a cropper here when they advertise land for people to buy. You know, if they advertise that the land's got certain facilities that it may not have, when they're advertising, locations such as distance from schools, shops, transport.
Yeah, like with the zoning now with the LA High School.
Well, absolutely. You know, it is what sort of zone is it if it's been if it's in the high schools? Yeah.
That is misleading.
Yeah. But the other thing here could also be, it's we can definitely see more the application to land agents, you know, in that advertising. But we could also think about conveyancers, you know, if you're advice in relation to the zoning of the land, you know, if you can subdivide in this particular area, you know, and you don't check, for example, what the latest zoning is in the area, you just assume. You know, you might think, you might off the cuff say, yes, you can subdivide in that area. I did one last week, but the block that you subdivided the week before might have been in a different zone, and so on and so forth. Okay, what's allowed in the area according to the zoning and so on. But because quite often in many council areas will have specific sizes, you know, and it could be that you need to be aware of what those sizes are, you know. Otherwise, they may not be able to subdivide to the extent that a client may want. So these different areas we just need to be aware of. Also, we've got, under the Australian Consumer Law, we've got unconscionable conduct. And we've got two sections there, sections 20 and 21. I'm not going to read through them. But these sections were inserted into the Trade Practices Act, which is now part of the Australian Consumer Law, which is the forerunner to this legislation. And you remember, a lot of those unconscionable conduct cases came from... You remember the case we talked about in contract law? In the 1980s, the different banking cases, remember?
Yeah, Amadio.
Amadio, thank you. Commercial Bank at Amadio. Where this concept of unconscionability, you know, where essentially we can look at it as where there's, you know, usually very unfair conduct being undertaken. Quite often in the common law, there had to be a special disability, you know, the parties and so on, language barriers, other disabilities, and people were taken advantage of. Okay, now those cases in the 80s, which a lot of them were brought against banks, okay, were very significant because they recognised this concept of unconscionability, things being excessively unfair, and Parliament liked them so much that they actually then brought this concept into legislation, okay, and it took a much broader application. So it basically means really just making sure in your dealings with people that you act very fairly.
And equal bargaining.
Yes.
Because it was unequal with...
Exactly. You know, they could have told them to go and get legal advice and they didn't.
Yeah.
You know? Okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah, good.